all their stuff. But we're live on a few different platforms. So YouTube, Instagram are the two main ones.
Excellent. So it says we're live now.
Yeah.
So
We're good, Candace?
It's starting the process. Hold on. I just have to, 1 second. It should be 125. Okay. Live on Facebook. All right. So you're good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
No
welcome.
Call me if
Welcome.
anything.
I will. Thank you.
All right.
Welcome. We're so happy you're joining us for today. This is Creating Zola Mondays, where we try to create that love energy that ignites in Gola, which is that healing energy, which really carries us forward to a bright and brilliant future that's so very healing and so very much needed at this time. I'm Dr. Linda James Myers. I am moderator of Creating Zola Mondays, and we have our wonderful panel and a brilliant guest we're so excited to have. I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves first briefly, and then we'll let our guest, Queen Mother Dawoti, introduce herself.
Well, I'm Dr. Harvey Linder. I'm a clinical psychologist in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm a member of the ABSI Ethics Committee, a past chair, co-founder of the Minnesota chapter of ABSI. I've served as a Midwestern regional rep in the past, and I'm currently a member of the ABSI Ethics Committee.
Excellent.
Robina.
Okay. Hey, y'all. I'm Robina Onwonga. I am a early career professional. Been part of ABSI since 2017 when I started grad school, and happy to be here and have this conversation today and just learn more about your process, Queen Mother, and all the things that connect to African psychology and how we can continue to support our community in the diaspora, particularly.
Hey everyone, my name is William Parham. I'm the crisis coordinator for Sawabonia Healing Circles, and I also work in democratizing mental health and generating somatic and parasympathetic practices for people and making them accessible for folks. And I'm excited to be here today to learn from the Queen Mother.
Excellent. Well, Queen Mother, we're so happy that you joined us, and despite our trials and tribulations, tried to get on. You hung in there so brilliantly, so we appreciate it. Would you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Certainly. I'm Her Royal Majesty Queen Mother, Dr. Dawoti Desir. I'm the Queen Mother of the African Diaspora for Benin Republic. I am also a Mambo Asogwe, which is a high priest in Haitian Voodoo, an interfaith leader. I am an activist, very much involved in the reparations movement, and I'm a mother, a brilliant creative entrepreneur who is also my official photographer. And I am not a psychologist, but I have a profound interest in what happens in psychology because of the nature of my scholarship around monuments and memorials of the transatlantic slave trade and some of the sites of trauma that I have visited, and in my overall interest in public history and public memory.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we're so happy to have you with us today. And that being said, your title is so impressive. Can you break it down for us in terms of what that mean, what all those beautiful accolades mean?
Well, as a Queen Mother, I am part of the royalty of Benin Republic. It is a space that has been created for us at the behest of the High Council of Kings. My traditional title is Pojito, Mother of the Leopard. Queen Mother isn't the right translation for it, but it's as close to Woman King as was one can get. The High Council of Kings consists of the most senior kings of Benin Republic, that is the kings who sat on the thrones of the kingdom of Dahomey, which is not to be mixed up with the kingdom of Benin, which was in Nigeria. Okay. The kingdom of Dahomey is now the Republic of Benin. And when recognizing the historic importance, the value, the place of the diaspora, and because I'm also a Haitian descendant and someone who has had a relationship with Benin for the better part of 30 years, I was identified through a process of divination as being the Queen Mother, and to hold this post some peculiar way. No one quite knew, well, what exactly is she going to do? And that's my job to figure out, and that's my job to figure out with everyone in the diaspora. But in so many ways, I've been doing the work all along, doing the work as a spiritual healer, a spiritual practitioner, doing the work in terms of being an activist, a human rights activist, fighting against racism, or for the elimination of racism, xenophobia, and other forms of intolerance, as part of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action plan, that bigger process. I've been doing that in terms of the work that I've been doing, recording our culture, our history, as an art historian, as a curator of contemporary art. I've been doing all of the work of an Africanist, if you will, in terms of making sure that we know who we are, what our history is about, and taking a Pan-African approach to doing so. So all of these things have made it clear to the council if there was going to be, and it wasn't just the council doesn't make the decision, it is FA, it is the FA, it is the divination process that ultimately leads to these kinds of determinations.
Excellent.
So can you tell us more about the vision of what the council wants to accomplish across the diaspora? You know, what is it what is the goal that you would say the council is working toward?
Well, the vision isn't so much about the council, because I think that council was recognized that there is a place for the diaspora, that there were kings and queens and princesses and members of nobility who too were deported from the African continent. And so, in fact, many of them have not even been in the diaspora, right? And so it is really myself who is determining what the role has to be. And while I work in relation with them in formal ways, I also work in relation with members of the government informally, and I work with civil society. And so, again, part of my work has been documenting and presenting, making sure that we understand what the nature of our experiences has been, the good, the bad, the ugly, as we have moved outside of the African continent into Europe, North America, the Caribbean, and South America. So part of it is documenting and sharing that history. I've done that through my scholarship and through my photographic work, and making that known to both sides, Africans on both sides of the continent. But as a priest, a part of my work is also that kind of social repair, you know, facilitating, enabling reparatory justice that way. Part of my work is because I do travel to all these places, and they could be bodies of water, they could be cemeteries, they could be monuments, they could be official sites of memory, and others that are not, you know, officially recognized, but
Mhm.
the community has recognized them. And so doing ritual work that helps to heal the psychology of the land, the psychology of the place, the energy of that place is
Okay.
a part of that. So that sort of ritualistic spiritual work is part of my responsibility. But my work is also about building bridges between the diaspora and the continent. The work of transnationalism, for instance, is really, really important and critical to the work that I'm very actively doing right now, which involves not only facilitating um, citizenship for members of the diaspora who want to repatriate, members of the diaspora who are looking to do business in Benin, but it is also about doing that work of um, a profound understanding,
Mhm.
understanding that what is normal on one side of the Americas is not normal on the other side, not of the Americas of the ocean is not necessarily normal on the other side. Is that business of you don't know your own history, or we might not know all aspects of our history,
Mhm.
facilitating that kind of exchange so that we avoid um, another level of trauma
Mhm.
that is forthcoming.
Okay.
Another, well, I can't say another level, but there are actual spaces of conflict that
Mhm.
exist as we are trying to sort of reintegrate and redefine the nature of African personhood, if you will. Um, so that's my mandate.
Yeah.
I'm having people understand this is the work that has to be done
Mhm.
because uh, on one side, the side of the council, as I said, if they haven't been here and they don't know the fullness and the complexity of our experience,
Mhm.
that there is one there. They know that part of it involves
Mhm.
uh, uh, enslavement,
Mhm.
but they don't know the breadth of it
Right.
in its nuances.
So if I understand you correctly, it sounds like you're saying that part of the process of beginning to heal the rupture has to begin with understanding the depth and extent of the rupture and how it came about. It sounds like you're also saying that one of the steps toward healing is to begin to build a network of the folks who are the victims of this rupture, who are spread out all over the world, on the continent and in the diaspora. And it sounds like your work is around beginning, trying to build a network of connections so that we can all work together towards that healing. Is that incorrect?
Yes, that is a part of it. I, I started out more creating the network of sites, of actual
Hmm.
physical locations,
Hmm.
so that people understood the global nature of the transatlantic slave trade.
Hmm.
Um, the Ma'afa, again, its depth, its breadth, its nuance, its ugliness, and even the beauty that came out of that, the resilience that came out of that, and the power that is still there. I don't operate from a space of deficits, but look for what has empowered us and what has enabled us to change the world.
Hmm.
Um, as a priest in the African traditions of voodoo, of Isheshe, of the Fa traditions, there's this element of continuous transformation that takes place. And
Hmm.
we've got to be acutely aware of what those transformative changes have been, where they have taken place, and where we're going to go with that energy, be it a positive experience or a negative one, but certainly one that has been about trauma and suffering has to result in something of power and beauty. So for me, it was initially the sights. Because whenever I show people my images, they're like, what? You mean it happened here, it happened there. Sweden was involved in the slave trade. You know, there are Africans in Colombia. There's that lack of knowledge and lack of information on one hand, even within the Americas. On the African continent, there are a lot of Africans who don't even know their own histories, and so they don't know, or they only have a portion of the role that their peoples played, not only in the process of loss, um, but unwittingly, and in some cases, very consciously contributing to the nature of our undoing that way. You know what I mean? So it is the people that is a part of the network later. But there's ultimately the goal is about, you know, becoming conscious and aware of place, and where we're situated in that place, and or in those spaces, and then how do we connect with each other so that we are able to heal together. Sometimes that means letting go of things, and sometimes it means embracing things that, you know, are repulsive, but we've got to own up to it.
Where can you give the audience some sort of entree to, like, where do they go to begin to, like, find these images that you talk about, and, you know, so where's some of your work that they can, like, connect to?
Well, one of my books is this book. Okay. It's called Redlining on Holocaust Memorials and the People of the Afro-Atlantic, Wash Kase Wash. And then there's a book, another one that came, this is sort of the mother. The baby came out beforehand, and it was called Good Kase Good, Conjuring Memory in Spaces of the Afro-Atlantic. And so I documented, again, you know, some 90 places that I had been to, distinct geographic places that speak to the nature of our experiences. And they range from, you know, one of the most shocking places I had been to, but it was like, aha, I knew it. You know, in Badagry, Nigeria, where there was what they call the Well of Atonement, but I remembered it as the well of forgetting, because women had to walk around the well a certain number of times. I believe it was 7 times, men 9, and then we had to literally drink from this well, citing incantations that basically said that we were going to forget who we were, forget our names, forget our families, forget our places, and submit to what was going to happen to us on the slave ships. So it's this ritual. I don't know if it was supposed to be an act of compassion or if it was something more insidious. But the well had been.
Forget who you are, forget what your identity is, forget what your culture is.
Yes, just forget everything, because you are going to the place. Ultimately, you're going to walk miles and miles and miles to a place of unknown destination. You would get on slave ships, and you would end up, whether it was in Europe, in Brazil, in the Caribbean. So there's
so who had them do this?
Who had them do this
ritual?
They're captives, and those captives included both Europeans and Africans. And this is why I raised the question: was this an act of compassion? Because it would have. I concluded that it must have been us, our people, who said, "Oh my God, we don't know where they're going. They're getting deported. They've been asked to submit to an act of erasure, right? So something has to be done." And so this ritual was done. You know, it's part of
telling them to forget, or am I not understanding?
To forget, yes, to forget.
That seems counterintuitive African
The
wisdom
ritual,
tradition at any
the
rate.
ritual to forget? No, it's ritual work. That's very African. I don't think it's something
No, no,
European.
no, no. I'm
Do
not
that.
saying the ritual's not African. I'm
Oh,
saying,
the process of
well, that's a
forgetting.
whole nother
Yes,
conversation. What I'm saying.
yes. No, I agree with you. The process of forgetting is counter to that. It is,
Yes,
which is
yes.
precisely why it had to be done as an act of compassion. But this wasn't just in Badagry. I found one also in Togo as well, and I posit that there are probably other places of forgetting. Um, and the two places that I mentioned, because they were physical wells, were in fact recognized by UNESCO. But there's a bush, a bunch of bushes on a corner I can take you to in Benin that has absolutely no markers there. It served the same purpose. It served the same purpose, but the only people
For
who know,
healing.
the only people who know are the priests who are
It's
all.
very interesting. Go
So
ahead.
it's a letting go of the past.
Okay, can we hear from William and Robina?
Mhm.
We're talking a lot about slavery and the roles that European nations played, and I'm just curious if you would feel comfortable talking at all about the conference that recently happened in Africa between the AU regarding reparations, and if you were comfortable talking about any of the developments that you heard of coming from this conference.
Yeah, I'm comfortable talking about it. I mean, we're supposed to be focusing on reparations and what the nature of reparations means. And, I made a presentation that talked about the triangulated roles of government, of civil society, and the monarchy. There are specific steps that each group of persons can take, of people can take, to facilitate the reparatory justice process. Reparations that we as African people have among ourselves may have to be, and is going to be, different from what we're seeking from European predators. Okay, because in the case of the Europeans, our capture, our torture, our deportation led to building up of their wealth, right? It contributed to their wealth. In the case of Africa, it depleted. It took away. It created a brain drain, and an extraction of resources in our physical person, but also intellectually. It also caused devastation on the African end as well that may not have been anticipated, with the loss of our physical person and the spiritual energies that we carry, in addition to the intellectual and creative knowledges that left the country. So part of what I'm talking with Kings about is, y'all need to consider making an apology. Some of you need to consider this was a crime against humanity to begin with. There are people who refuse to do that. But having said that, you can make space, because I talked about the Council of Kings, and to some extent, again, unofficially, the government recognizing my role, but more importantly, recognizing the importance of the diaspora, and thus these repatriation, these offers for citizenship. That movement is afoot. Because again, there is space that is being created for us. And so that space isn't just, oh, great, I'm going to have citizenship, but I want land as well, right? I want to be fully integrated into the social structures of that society, right? But I also want, and I need, and we have to demand, that our experiences here in the Americas, our civilizations here, and what we've created, what we've gone through, has to be recognized as well. And there's not going to be a second process of erasure on the continent. but that somehow, for myself, this is my personal view, that our African brothers and sisters have to sort of sit back and say, tell me what your story is. Tell me how we're going to work together. Tell me how do we incorporate the lessons and the ethos that you have acquired and developed in the Americas, or that were African constructs that have sort of emerged or evolved into another space because of the nature of our historic experiences, right? Because of the nature of the time-space continuum, things have changed. Tell us how you bring this in. How do we honor and respect that in our societies now?
Mm-hmm.
That actually connects to a question that I was thinking through as you were explaining some of the like the vision and your role, and then you mentioned like your interest in psychology. I'm curious about the connection between African spirituality and spatiality. So our connection to, space, or let's say geographic location and things like that. And in particular, like your thoughts on our healing process as African Black folks living, let's say, in different, and this could be so expansive because we've experienced trauma here in the Americas. There's Africans who have experienced it through colonization. And then we have our, siblings in the UK and other and lands that that we inhabit, but where our people were demoralized. How does the healing process work while we're in those spaces, and how can African spirituality kind of come into play with that for our healing?
Well, there's a couple of things. I did speak about this recently with the International Committee of N'Cobra, and also on a podcast called Reparations Now. But part of what has to happen is reparations, and the healing starts with self-acknowledgement, and with African spirituality itself. Okay. I don't want to get into this business about what Christianity is African. Yes, it is in a certain part of the African continent, which most of us historically are not from, right? So I don't want to get into this Judeo-Christian thing that we often get sucked up in and lost in that space, but go back to who were we before Christianity was invented? Who were we before forced conversion to Islam? Who were we beforehand? And so there is this kind of Afrophobic disposition that we have, Afrophobia, and this irrational fear of the sensibilities, the cultures, and things African. We harbor that. We harbor that. And as intellectuals, some of us are perhaps the most guilty of holding on to these things. We sort of got sucked into the sort of the ugliness of scientific racism, internalized. So we need to purge ourselves of that. And when we do that, we also have to acknowledge the fact that voodoo, that arara, that candomblé, that ubuntu, that all of these African-based religions are also sacred sciences. And they're sacred sciences that accompany, that embody everything from marine science to agriculture to psychology as well. I'm thinking back to my experiences in Benin, and in addition to being some of the most, I don't want to use the word refined, but sophisticated chemists that I know, the psychological game that is played is an enormously sophisticated one when it comes to sort of directing not only the life of an individual, but the lives of communities. And so these are amongst our sacred sciences. We have to stop equating these traditions, and I'll stick with voodoo for a moment because that's the tradition I know best, in terms of, oh my God, they're worshiping devils. Oh my God, they're running around with chicken bones in their noses. No, it's not about that. So the first step has to do with understanding who you are as an African person prior to Christianity prior to Islam, and what does that mean? How do we abide by the four movements of the sun? How do we understand the vocabulary that our ancestors have left for us
Mm.
so that we can move forward in the world? How do we understand and take advantage of the fa of Tofa, Ifa, however you want to call it, with this business of divination that allows you to understand your past, understand who you are now and the environment that you're in now and the impact that the past and and the circumstances around you, how they're affecting your movements, and how to forecast. This is sort of prophetic self that we have to acknowledge. Those who are not yet there, the person that we're going to evolve into being, sometimes quite genetically, in terms of our progeny. So we have to understand that first and foremost, and that's the role that African-based traditions play, because it's their theologies of liberation, right? They free us first. Once you free the mind, you guys know better than me, right? It's like this.
Right.
Once you free the mind, can you hold anybody back?
Not if you free up, truly free it.
Absolutely. We talk about free the land, free the mind first.
So one of the questions I have is your mention of Christianity, pre-Christianity. So if you go back to the beginnings of what we'd call classical African civilization, back to the earliest historical records, back to the Medu Neter, what you see is that those beliefs, ideas, understanding eventually, I won't say evolve, but maybe devolve into Christianity and other Euro-Western ideas about one's relationship to Neter, or Neteru, or to God, or to.
Right.
But what confused me earlier was your mention of the rituals that these leaders, spiritual leaders, some of them seem to have, they captured and enslaved Africans going through, that would help them forget their history. And that's the complete opposite of what many African-centered psychologists have been working toward. We're I being one, are asking people to go in to the depths of that essential divine spirit being and remember, and argue that in remembering is what allowed us to survive centuries of dehumanization and come out the moral and spiritual leaders of many nations. So,
right. And are the two things contradictory? Can they not coexist in the same space at the same time? It isn't everywhere on the African continent that we found these sites of forgetting. There is a cartography of oubliage, a cartography of literally forgetting things. That exists. Don't exist above, exists below, right? If there is an insistence upon memory, because memory is part of what defines our humanity.
Absolutely.
What makes us not human anymore? What becomes an act of mercy is forgetting, because the pain of remembering, especially since we don't know where we're taking you to, we don't know what kind of, I don't want to say hell, because that automatically means something very specific in Christian theology, but we don't know what space we were sending our people to. And it's a space that even when information come back, it was so horrible. In many ways, it didn't even exist in our own psychology, in our own cosmology. So might it not be better to forget?
Forget what was you prior to kid capture? What are we forgetting? Maybe I'm not understanding that.
To forget, it's like a tabula. The way I understood it was like a tabula rasa. You're just wiping the slate clean so that you can start anew wherever this other space is. But this is ritual. This is ritual. It doesn't mean that, we're going to actually forget. That's not the nature of memory. That's not the nature of genetics. We're literally who we are, what we are, and our memories is in our blood.
Right? Genetic memory. That's why I'm really struggling with this idea that spiritual leaders were having people try do that. But I'm not knowledgeable of that. That's
Mhm.
counter to my understandings and research. But I do appreciate your sharing that, because it very much, I think, grounds us into this question of you mentioned the conflict between Africans colonized on the continent and Africans kidnapped and captured as chattel enslaved people. The
Mhm.
conflict that now emerges between those two, and I would want your opinion in terms of what you see as the core of the conflict.
Okay. This is a peek inside of the well of atonement, the well of forgetting
Mhm.
in Badagry.
Mhm.
As I
I don't
mentioned,
have any doubt about such
right.
wells
As
existing.
I
I
said, it
don't
was
know.
just in Nigeria. There were a number of places in which these sites existed. So just because we're not aware of them here in the Americas doesn't mean that
Mhm.
there wasn't some logic, some rationale.
I'm
I
just wanting to understand it,
yeah, well,
because it's so counter to what we would see as healing.
exactly, and that's why we're having this discussion. Um, uh, I look at. I don't want to use the word discovered. I learned of these sites well over a decade ago when I started doing this research. I visited these sites. That's
Mhm.
my photograph inside the well of forgetting. It's not somebody else's online. I went to the other place in Togo and captured images there. I went to the tree of no return in Benin, and then there are places of remembrance as well.
Mhm.
So as you have places, the
Mhm.
door of no return, that becomes the door of return, be
Mhm.
it in Ghana, be it in Ouida, be it in Senegal. Again, as above, so below. You're going to find the things that do and the things that undo. The black that is and the black that ain't, that do and don't, that will and won't. Think of Ellison. There was that eloquent reference to that in The Invisible Man. So these are conversations that we need to explore among ourselves
Mhm.
and speak to the oral historians,
Right.
you know, in
So what
situ
you
on the continent who know this.
so what do you see at the core of the conflict based on your experiences and travels?
The core of the conflict between us, um, in Haitian voodoo, in the music, we have an experience called the casse. And the casse is a rhythm that is played over and over and over and over again, then it breaks,
Mhm.
right? It's the pregnant pause in jazz. It's what we call the groove in funk. It's these places where a rupture occurs. And
Mhm.
rupture could create this, it's almost a gap as wide as the Atlantic Ocean itself, where everything
Mhm.
sort of falls in and disappears. But the rupture is also a place where community comes together because we all lose ourselves. And
Mhm.
the possibility of merging and engaging can take place in that gap. And so it is both a place of conflict and is a place of coming together.
Mhm.
But the fact that so many people do not know their own histories, Africans not knowing their histories, Africa that is on the continent, and I would argue many Africans in the Americas who don't know not only their own histories, but the totality and the complexity of our collective histories.
Mhm.
How, for example, the Haitian Revolution contributed to the liberation of Latin America. And I'm not talking about one country. I'm talking about several, from Panama to Ecuador to Venezuela to Colombia. I'm talking about not knowing that, not knowing something as simple as IT's role in bankrupting Napoleon, and therefore the Louisiana Purchase had to take place, which expanded the territory of the United States by
Mhm.
30%. We don't know these things
Mhm.
because
So you see that historical knowledge as
it's
core.
critical. because there's also a spiritual component. There's a metaphysical piece to it, and there's a piece that ultimately ties us to healing, to that self-repair
Mm,
that
mm,
I spoke of, that self-reparations.
I'm
mm,
curious for someone who would want to deep diver into the concept of the will of forgetting. Where would I start? Like where could I go to start my own little like dive on the topic?
Can you go to Badagry? Can you go to Nigeria? See, I don't believe in this business of doing things abstractly. The energy, the knowledge, the history is in situ. It's in the place itself.
mm,
You can go there. To the extent that I've written something about it, you can go to my books and read about that. There have been in recent years, I would say since 2015, more and more scholars talking specifically about that site, but not necessarily connecting it to other sites of forgetting. In my work, I talk about God, not as you understand it, but God as the geography of denial.
mm,
Geography of denial, G-O-D.
mm,
And part of what is denied
mm,
is the notion of ourself, of our personhood,
mhm,
um, our histories, the sort of the epistemological knowledges that that we have, our languages, the history of cultural genocide, if we will, and the understanding what Ma'afa actually means, the great suffering.
mhm,
Looking that experience, that horrible chapter in human history of bondage as a crime against humanity that should have never occurred. Looking at it from our perspective, not from the European centered one.
yes,
And therefore our healing has to be looked at from that perspective as well.
I think that's been the mission of the Association of Black Psychologists since its inception, to go to that level. And I'm glad you brought in the whole cultural aspect of, what can we say, going to the deep structure of culture,
mhm,
to understand that mindset, who could kidnap and capture and find things belonging to others, versus the mindset of seeing oneself as divine spirit energy
mm,
connected to the totality of the cosmos, future generations, nature, community. Those two different mindsets, those two cultural mindsets, I think understanding those can be so very helpful in terms of resolving the conflict, because
mm,
it introduces or allows us to be exposed to a different way of knowing, a
Right.
different way of reasoning, a sense of who we are, ontological differences about reality itself. So, as Black psychologists, I think we've kind of focused. I should not speak for all Black psychologists. I, as a Black
Oh, but
psychologist, have
no,
focused there.
You're right, but we also do need to go to places.
mhm,
We need to go to the Cité de la Ferrière and see those cannons at the top of that mountain. That city. If you ever come back here to try to take us away, I I don't have a bullet. I have a cannon with your name on it, right? We understand the level of that audacity and power and that sense of never again, because that is what reparations is ultimately about, the guarantee of non-repetition. So if we say never again, the others have got to hear that. So when you go to a place like Haiti and you see that, you understand that, you feel that, you can only walk away empowered, right? You need to go to, there's some places I went to a few times. And so my experiences have changed, not necessarily for the better. I went to Senegal, decades ago for the first time, stood in the Maison des Esclaves. I could literally I could smell the feces, I can smell the urine, I could smell the blood that was there hundreds of years later. I go back most recently, let's say 5 years ago. Do you know that odor is no longer there? Why? Because it was refurbished. Why? There were more, well, we want to push tourism, right? And there were more white folks coming in, more Europeans coming in, and they couldn't bear the stench. So it was literally blown, it was anesthetized. It's these are things that happen to spaces, that happen to places, that are also a reflection of what has happened to us.
I think it's also true. I'm sorry, William, you were going to say something.
No,
No,
my was agreeing. I was agreeing with that. That the sanitation of blackness happens so often because the rawness of it can make the colonizer afraid or uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Well, one of my experience has been also that because you can go within to find that truth and that knowledge as well as to the place. The first time I went to what they call the slave castles, I call them the slave dungeons
yes.
in Ghana, I was kind of like, oh my goodness, I feel my ancestral spirits.
Yes.
But the second time I went, all I got was a spirit of triumph. That spirit of triumph that I still feel. So there's so much as above, so below, as you referred to. I think if we can go within to that heart mind, that epigenetic memory of triumph, so much can be healed. So much repair and restoration. We're almost out of time. Are there any last questions or comments people would like to make?
Yeah, I've also been like keeping an eye on our streams just to see if folks have questions, just more so agreement and thanking folks for the healing space and just the conversation. And then to go back to the question that I asked, I appreciate that you just named the way that we've been socialized or colonized to think about African spirituality and to look at it from a demonized type of perspective. And the reason that I asked the question about the spatiality is because when I think about access, like for myself, I am able to travel back to the continent and experience that. But there are people who may never be able to do that or don't have the access to, whether financially or whatever is kind of
Now
in
playing Never Been Remixed by Wiz Khalifa.
I think being able to have another way, like you said, Nana Linda, to go inside, and you were Queen Mother, you were alluding to knowing ourselves, like that self-knowledge, a knowledge of who we are as Africans, and not allowing our personhood to be erased and stuff. I feel like that's really important for that. The people that are not able to go and smell and see and touch and hear the sounds and be in a space where they are the majority and everybody is, celebrating you and you just feel more united. So I think I just wanted to say that I feel like it's important that we mention that piece, that the healing can also happen from where we are if we know who we are.
Absolutely. And sometimes you don't have to go that far. One of my biggest aha moments took place in Savannah, Georgia, in the first one of the first Black churches there. Something I knew it had to exist, and I just had to find it, and it found me. The photos, by the way, behind me are some of my photos. Part of my research. I went to this church, and there were holes drilled in the floor of the church. They were like diamond shaped with crosses. And I thought, ooh, these look like veve. Veve are these cosmograms that we use to call down spirit in voodoo, and we find that's the kind of language existing in other African-based traditions. But the triangle is actually the sign of initiation, but it's also a stylized circle, right? And the cross that was in between was the connection between heaven and earth, and the horizontal line between life and death. These holes were, what were they doing on the floor? There were lots of them. They weren't decorative. They were there because that's where Africans were ushered. They were hidden underneath the floorboards. The holes were for them to literally breathe as they made their way through the Underground Railroad. Right. So for me, this was the perfect place where spirit, physical space, and memory converged. But if you just walked in the room, you just saw a bunch of small holes in the ground, you might think, this is nothing. But in fact, our people were safely harbored there. So a lot of times we have history, spaces, these kinds of connections in our own communities. We have to leave ourselves open to them. You know, there's a level of vigilance that must be there, that has to accompany our being as we move through space, so that not only do we recognize these things when they're in front of us, but they say, hey, look at me. I've got a story to tell you. I've got your story to tell you. I've got our story to share. So that energy pulls us and draws us to it as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Was there anything, was there a question?
It kind of, but I think it was more so like people giving commentary about like sacred places, folks sharing like the Sea Islands, Gullah Geechee Igbo Landing,
Yeah.
also just mentioning their experiences with spirituality being rooted, like rooting practice for us. And then someone said, asked if ABSI can help create a digital version of going back for that healing we all need. So cool idea.
That's
I
one
think
of the arguments that I make. We have to take advantage of this technology. The technology in and of itself, it's binary. It's ones and zeros. And if you do cowrie shells or use EFI in any way, you know it's ones and zeros. Things that are open and things that are closed. 16 calories. Let's make use of the spiritual energy that we're in right here, right now. So make that spiritual space.
So interesting as the creativity of African ancestry people who create and bring forth that knowledge of duality, the one and zero. That's the basis of all creation. So thank you so very much. And
You're
we
welcome.
appreciate your being with us. And thank you, panelists, for your thoughts and questions. And until the next time, peace and blessings.
Okay.
Okay.
I think.
Always. All right. Are we still? We're done.
Yeah, we are. We're gonna end it in a second.
Okay.